The Quartering Act of 1765 was a significant moment in the history of the American colonies, as it marked a turning point in the relationship between the colonists and the British government. The act was passed by the British Parliament and it required colonial assemblies to provide housing and supplies for British troops stationed in the colonies. This act was a response to the increasing unrest and tension in the colonies, and it was seen as a way to maintain order and stability in the region. In the years leading up to the passage of the Quartering Act, the colonies had been growing increasingly restless. There were a number of factors contributing to this, including economic dissatisfaction and religious tensions. The colonists were also frustrated with the British government's interference in their affairs, and they resented the growing power and influence of the Crown. This led to a growing sense of independence and a desire for greater autonomy in the colonies. The Quartering Act was met with immediate resistance from the colonists. Many saw it as a violation of their rights and an infringement on their liberties. They argued that they should not be forced to provide for the troops, and that the British government had no right to dictate their actions. This was particularly true in the colonies of Massachusetts, where the act was particularly unpopular and the resistance was particularly strong. The Quartering Act was also seen as a direct threat to the rights and freedoms of the colonists. It was seen as an attempt by the British government to establish a stronger presence in the colonies, and to tighten its grip on the region. The act was seen as a precursor to further infringements on the rights of the colonists, and many feared that it was just the first step in a broader attempt to undermine their liberties. Despite the opposition of the colonists, the Quartering Act was implemented and put into effect. The British government made it clear that it was determined to enforce the act, and that it would not back down in the face of resistance. This led to a growing sense of tension in the colonies, as the colonists continued to resist the act and the British government became increasingly determined to enforce it. The Quartering Act was one of the key events that led to the American Revolution. It was seen as a direct challenge to the rights and freedoms of the colonists, and it served as a catalyst for the growing independence movement in the colonies. The act was also a key factor in the growing sense of distrust and animosity between the colonists and the British government, as the colonists saw it as proof of the government's disregard for their rights and freedoms. In the years leading up to the Revolution, the Quartering Act was one of the key issues that was hotly debated in the colonies. It was seen as a symbol of the growing divide between the colonists and the British government, and it served as a rallying point for the independence movement. In the end, the Quartering Act was one of the key events that helped to trigger the American Revolution, as the colonists rallied around the cause of independence and began to take steps to break away from British rule. The Quartering Act of 1765 was a turning point in the history of the American colonies. It was a clear indication of the growing tension between the colonists and the British government, and it was a key factor in the growing independence movement. The act was a direct challenge to the rights and freedoms of the colonists, and it helped to lay the foundation for the American Revolution. The Quartering Act remains a significant moment in the history of the United States, and its legacy continues to be felt to this day.